Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Low Season Traveller Insider Guides. I'm your host, Jed Brown, founder of Low Season Traveller, and this week we're joined by Andy Brabin, who is the founder of Discovery by Rail. Andy is an unbelievably well-travelled train geek, his words not mine, who loves to share his passion for travelling by train to explore the world. To date, he has visited 175 countries and travelled by train in 75 of them, from South Georgia, not the one in the United States, to Narvik and all points in between. He founded the award-winning Rail Bookers Company in 2003 and travels on average twice a month exploring the world and travelling by train, giving him first-hand experience of what's on offer and how to make the most out of trips. We've all seen the recent Travel Across the World series where teams have to travel by land across different continents, and whilst I've never done much travel by rail myself, I was absolutely fascinated to learn more. Enjoy. So, Andy Brabin, you are very welcome to the Low Season Traveller Insider Guides podcast. Great to have you with us today.
Nice to be with you.
Thanks very much. So, Andy was really happy that you accepted our invitation to join us for Low Season Traveller Insider Guides, partly because we've never done anything about rail travel, and you set up your company Discover by Rail, and you indeed have travelled an awful lot of the world by rail. Remind me how many countries you've been to?
Well, it's 175 countries, and I've travelled on trains in 93, I think it is at the moment.
Wow.
So yes, quite extensive travels.
It is quite extensive travels, and why I was quite interested to speak to you is, as you know, I'm quite close to aviation and the aviation industry. We're on lockdown at the moment. Nobody's traveling or booking anywhere. And a lot of the talk in the aviation industry is that there are going to be significantly fewer airlines in the next 12 months and beyond. And what that means is that flight prices are almost certainly going to be increasing in the not too distant future, which means that maybe there's going to be more of an opportunity to travel by rail and for people to discover the joys of rail travel. But for those that don't really understand what it's all about, why don't you start by just telling us how you got into traveling the world by rail, and why is it special for anybody that hasn't done it?
Okay, well, the family history is kind of railway related. My father, when he was young, used to work on steam locomotives at Horwich Loco Works, just outside of Manchester. Also had a great uncle who was a shed master. So one of my earliest memories, this is giving my age away as well, is being put on the footplate of a steam locomotive.
Oh, wow.
Probably it was right at the end of steam. So I believe Bolton Shed was one of the last sheds that had steam locomotives, and that's was why he worked. Yeah. I've always had wanderlust, probably from the age of 15. I was a train spotter geek. Yep. So in my very younger days, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, I was a train spotter. And then one of my friends at school was also a train spotter. So we decided to venture farther afield than Bolton and the Northwest. Mm-hmm. So we used to do trips down to London to go to all the engine sheds in London. Forget all the historical sites, forget everything about London. It was focusing going to Finsbury Park, Old Oak Common, which were the places to go to on the train spotter agenda. And then as time went on, after my A-levels, in fact, my first interrail was after I'd finished my A-levels. So I explored Europe for a month, went down to Yugoslavia, all through Italy, etc. And I just got a real taste of long distance rail travel and exploring countries at ground level. You mentioned about aviation. Serves its purpose, get from A to B quickly. But traveling by train, you're making a journey and experiencing the journey. You're seeing the country at ground level. In some countries, with the speed of the trains, you're seeing every blade of grass at ground level. And other ones you're speeding through the countryside. And also, it's an opportunity to talk to people. You meet locals on the train. Um, so yeah, it's just the whole experience. You get a flavour of. I feel you get a flavour of the country travelling by train.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I was reading the here in the UK. There was it must have been at the end of last year. They had the ABTA trends for 2020 to watch out for. It'd be quite interesting reading that now, knowing what we do know with COVID-19, because obviously nobody predicted that. But
Yeah,
what they did say is one of the trends in the wider industry is the trend of slow travel, and by slow travel, and this is what I related to, is they meant that it's more about purposeful travel. So taking your time and really experiencing the destination. And that resonated with me because, low season travelers like myself and our listeners, that's what we want to do. We want to have a real authentic experience. We travel during low seasons to engage more with the local people. Because we really want that. That's something that we crave because it's part of the travel experience. And it
yeah.
sounds to me that exactly what you're saying is that's what you're going to get when you travel by rail, that you just can't get when you travel by air. I mean, I travel by air all the time, and it's just apart from anything else, it's just massively stressful. Can trains be as stressful as air?
Well,
Be honest.
I have to be honest with you. Yes,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
people who work with me through my Discover by Rail, for example, I de-stress the travel experience. I always have longer connections than necessary. Most European stations in European cities will have a coffee shop, will have a bakery, will have somewhere to sit and just kill time for your next connection. If you did a tight connection, your journey to the connection is always more stressful because you're wondering if you are going to make the connection. Plus, if you miss the connection, then it can be a hassle sometimes, depending what type of tickets you have. But just going back to slow travel, certainly in the UK market, and from the people I talk to, I think people will be taking fewer trips, but longer trips. So the air market is very much for a lot of weekend breaks to Europe. I think with environmental awareness, people will be spending longer on fewer trips. So I don't think we'll see as many weekend breaks. And that's even if the airlines are there to service those weekend breaks. So in a way, the COVID-19 has brought about the environmental awareness perhaps sooner than I would have expected. So gradually have seen people switching away, certainly from a middle class traveller market, if that makes sense. Because I feel at the moment, a lot of rail travel, the experiential rail travel, is quite a middle class product. But I'm all for social inclusion. So I want to see everybody having the opportunity to travel by rail and to experience all the benefits as we've mentioned, kind of the interaction with locals, etc. So what Discover by Rail does as well, I'm able to access, or I know about the best deals for people. Sometimes they are hidden away. So rail travel can actually be quite affordable. Even going for those longer destinations such as Prague, where instantly people would look at the price of a flight to Prague. Certainly in the past, it would have been quite well priced. And then looked at the price for a train. Well, first of all, where would they find the price of a train from the UK to Prague?
I wouldn't even know where to start. Wouldn't know where to start.
Exactly. So it's quite complicated, and a lot of the rail fares, if you look at a through journey, can be quite expensive. However, if you're creative and start to break the trip down, so go from the UK to Brussels, for example, on the Prague scenario, have a longer connection, have a beer and mule frit whilst you're waiting. Then you can pick up a fare from Brussels to Prague in second class is €23 one way. but you
Wow.
have to be very creative how it's done. There is a specific way of doing that, which for the general public wouldn't be. It isn't visible.
Yep.
So in a way, it's slow travel, it's creative travel, and also it is low season travel as well, because taking the Eurostar on a Friday evening or a Sunday evening potentially could be classed as high season. But if you go on a Wednesday midweek in February, you'll get the £58 return to Brussels. Whereas if you're doing that Friday evening, Sunday evening, you're into the £100 plus.
Yeah.
So it kind of all works together. Slow travel, low season travel, experiential travel, and I think trains are the way to achieve that.
Yep. I would agree. I'll let say I'm certainly getting one over. We spoke about this actually off air before about this. There's a program on in the UK at the moment. Apologies for all of our listeners everywhere else, and it's called Race Around the World. And they, in fact, it's just finished, I think, actually, hasn't it? And there was one. It was last season's episode was where they were travelling from London all the way to Singapore, and an awful lot of that was by rail. And I've been watching it with my family, and we're all just thinking, God, wouldn't that be an incredible journey to do all of that distance? What you must have done, I guess, journeys not dissimilar to that, right?
Yeah. Well, my longest journey, I would say, was Pyongyang to London. So North Korea through to London. But it was very much experiential, slow travel.
Yeah.
So it's from Pyongyang into China, all through China up to the northeast to Urumqi, over the border into Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan. That was on a private train. There are no scheduled trains crossing the borders into Turkmenistan. So it was a special train,
yeah.
And then up through Russia, Volgograd, Moscow, across to Warsaw, Berlin, Brussels, and back to the UK. On that trip, I was so wanting the person next to me on Eurostar from Brussels to London to start talking to me. And they'll say, "Oh, and where have you come from?"
Yeah.
Well, actually, not Bruges, not Brussels. Actually, from Pyongyang.
Yeah, explain that. How long did that journey take you altogether?
I did it over 5 weeks.
5 weeks. Okay, so that is.
I got to experience the places on
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's such an important part of it. Again, we often talk about, and I think it's been quite popular past sort of 10 years. Everyone's like, you've got to see such and such a place, and you feel that they turn up, have their selfie, and then move on. And it's this bucket list kind of, I don't know, aspirations. And I always sort of think, again, we always sort of say on low season travelers, it's more, experience the destination. It's not about just getting your selfie and moving on. It's about really getting under the skin of it. And the irony is, low season travelers, if anything, they're probably not going to go to the Eiffel Tower and get their selfie, because that's just not how we roll. That's where everyone goes in Paris. What we'd want to know is, what are the hidden gems in Paris that we can go to that maybe other people don't go to, and it's a little bit cooler just to, avoid where everyone else goes. Well, do you get that?
Yeah, definitely. Over the past 2 or 3 years, I've had quite a focus on Poland and the Czech Republic. Speak to most people about Poland, and it would be Krakow. The Czech Republic would be Prague.
Yep.
Could they name other cities? Well, maybe they could name Warsaw in Poland. That would be it. But a city called Zamość, which is over near the Ukrainian border. Fantastic, an amazing place. It's set up on a hill. It's not been touched by any damage from kind of previous conflicts. In the absolute middle of nowhere. The tourists there were basically Polish and Ukrainians. Plus, with it being off the beaten track, the price of accommodation was actually very good. Yeah. And what I found as well, particularly in Central Eastern Europe, a lot of money's been invested in the tourist infrastructure in terms of hotels. People have seen that as a business opportunity. they've had subsidies to build new properties. Quite a lot of properties with character, family owned, usually with a restaurant. Restaurants tend to be very good. So sometimes it's a restaurant with a hotel attached, and it's priced for the local market, and you're just part of the local scene when you're there. So it's not going into a bar in Prague where everybody's speaking English. So occasionally it can be difficult to find some people who speak English. But my rule of thumb for that is if you see a younger person who's reasonably well dressed, 98% of the time they'll speak English. Yeah. And in the smaller places, they're quite happy to speak English and to help you
to practice their English, I suppose.
Precisely. So going off the beaten track, I always recommend people who are going to the Czech Republic go to Prague, absolutely, but then take a ride out, go to one of the other towns, somewhere like Kutná Hora, which is a bit on the tourist track. But if you go to Kutná Hora, spend the night, because it tends to be a day trip from Prague that people do. So 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the city becomes very quiet. All the day trippers have gone.
Yeah.
And you're there with the locals, experiencing how they experience their city.
Yeah.
So and plus also, again, by taking the train, you're seeing the countryside. You're relaxed. You're not driving, being worried about, for the Brits, driving on the wrong side of the road.
Yeah.
Your journey is part of the experience.
Yeah, absolutely love it. It's interesting actually when we talk about Prague. It's one of those places. It's probably one of the more major cities that I've never been to. And people have told me, they've told me that Prague's a beautiful place. You have to go to Prague. But I've also heard stories about Prague being very, very busy, very, very touristy. And I'm not sure with Prague as to whether I've a bit like Venice. I've never been to Venice, and my feeling is I've probably missed the trick for Venice. I sort of feel because I want to experience a destination, at a slower pace without the masses of tourists. I can't get over this enough. I hate crowds. It stresses me out. Really, really does. I'm just not a big city person, although I do appreciate big cities. But I kind of feel that with Venice, from what I've heard, even during the low season, probably missed the trick now. I'm not going to get the experience that I would want in Venice from what I can see anytime soon. Right or wrong? You tell me.
November, January, clear, crisp days in Venice quite often. So clear blue sky. In the day trippers have left the city by 4 or 5 in the evening. You can be wandering around the city, and you can be the only person wandering around. So it really is a completely different kind of scenario. During the day it's heaving, but at night I think it's a wonderful place to explore. And also it's this kind of place where one feels quite safe wandering around the streets and there's nobody there. So because if there's any crime, they've got nowhere to escape to.
Fair play.
They're kind of stuck on the island. I think Venice is wonderful, but not in busy periods.
Yeah, for sure.
And the same with Prague.
With Prague.
Yeah, with Prague as well. Prague is a midweek destination. That's your low season.
Yeah.
You'll get a lot of maybe the people you've been speaking to who've done Prague for a weekend.
I'm sure they have.
It's just totally different midweek. It used to be the same with Amsterdam as well. Amsterdam midweek used to be so different from the weekend. I think it has changed. In Belgium, Bruges is another one. Midweek in Bruges, the hotels are offering you 3 nights for the price of 2. There's not as many people around, whereas the weekend it's expensive.
Yep.
So, and again, Bruges, fantastic destination to get to by train.
You just seem to be picking off literally every place I haven't been to, which is great. So now I'm sticking Bruges on the list, Andy.
Okay.
When we talk about a lot of people, of my age group, actually, a lot of people when they came out of uni, they went interrailing around Europe. And I'm conscious that there must be a lot of people out there that never did that, and I didn't do it. And like I say, I've spoken to my wife recently and said, maybe this is something we could actually do either with the kids or maybe when the kids have flown the nest, and we could do it on our own. Are many people still doing interrailing, and how easy or not is it to interrail around Europe, and how affordable is it?
Okay, so Europe for me is split into two when it comes to railways and interrails. France and Spain, and then basically the rest of Europe. Because in France and Spain, a lot of trains require a reservation to get on board the train. And also you pay a supplement to travel on the trains on top of the price of the Interrail, which particularly for Spain is logistically quite complicated to make the reservations before you get there. Once in Spain, you can make reservations, but if you're traveling in the high season, you'll find trains are fully booked. So you can be kind of stuck. Whereas Germany, Austria, Czech Republic, going further east, a lot of the trains you just turn up and go. Italy is a bit of a mixture. If you want to do slow travel, you can travel the whole country without any supplements. But as I mentioned earlier, some of the rides you'll see every blade of grass because they can be quite slow. So you can pay a supplement to hop on a high-speed train to cover some of the distance. And in Italy, you pay an extra €10 for that. And in Italy, there's never any trouble getting on the high-speed trains. I love what the Italian railways have a marketing campaign, which is basically Metro d'Italia, which are all the high-speed trains. They consider them as a metro system because Milan to Rome, there's a minimum of 2 trains an hour. Florence to Rome, 3 or 4 trains an hour. So they're just very frequent services. So yeah. In terms of affordability, there are still a number of night trains that people can take if you're prepared to sit in a seat overnight, which a lot of the youngsters backpacking still do. It's a free night's accommodation, basically.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah, some of the more international night trains. There's a newish company called NightJet who run some night trains. You do have to pay a supplement on those, but again, it can be quite affordable supplements, 20, 25 euros. And if you think then you've saved on your accommodation for a night, people can be can be canny as well, even for younger people. Go for a first class pass. If you're in Austria, you can use the first class lounges at the railway stations. So you get your breakfast, and then in the evening they're serving snacks. They serve wine, quite decent wine, beers, all free of charge. So if you're in Vienna for a few days, just nip to the station and stock up.
Love it.
So yeah, and then also some trains where when you are traveling, if you're doing a first class option, some drinks will be included and a small snack as well. Those tend to be the ones where you have to pay a supplement. Yeah. But again, that kind of the supplement then pays for your drinking.
What kind of a price differential are we talking? So, to get an Interrail, I mean, what is it? You get an Interrail ticket that covers the whole of Europe for a period of time. And what's the difference in price between a standard and a first class? Is it what kind of money roughly? I've no idea how much we're talking about here. Not a clue.
Good question. I'll be honest, I'm not up to date because I'm not
done.
No,
it's all right. No, it's all right.
A little while. But usually for the first class, it's generally about 70%. Usually about maybe 70% more expensive. Yeah. And they have different types of Interrails. They have what's known as the global Interrail, and that covers the whole of Europe, including Turkey as well.
Okay.
So Turkey is included in the Interrail. And then you can buy individual country passes as well. Sometimes there may be not such good value because often there are local passes for the country which you can buy locally, and particularly when you get over into Central Eastern Europe. So again, they're priced for that market, whereas an Interrail's priced for the whole of Europe. It's better priced for the local market. As I say, off the top of my head, I can't recall the price of Interrail. Actually, I may have something, but this is my
European rail timetable.
So
let me tell you this. So this is the only reason I even know about interrailing as really is I used to work back in the day when I started out in the travel industry. I used to work for Thomas Cook in the foreign exchange, and what we used to sell in Thomas Cook in the foreign exchange was the European rail timetable.
That's where I used to get them.
The amount of times people would be coming in, we want the latest timetable, and it was just I never even really analysed, what was in that and why it was useful and everything else. And now that I'm actually seriously thinking about one day doing this interrailing around Europe, now I'm like, actually, those things must have been gold.
Definitely. And in fact, if I can give it a bit of a plug, European Rail Timetable.eu.
Yes.
And it's fantastic, even for the armchair traveller.
Yeah.
I'm a timetable geek. I could spend an evening reading a timetable and reliving past travel experiences or planning new ones, or just dreaming.
Yeah.
So that's but sometimes they have the prices of the Interrails in. This edition doesn't, unfortunately, which is a shame.
Not to worry. So then, outside of Europe, I guess you've travelled by rail on pretty much every continent, I guess, really, of the major ones.
I have.
You've done it in North America, South America, Asia. Right, probably a very difficult question for you, and I appreciate that. Where is your favourite place to take a rail journey, or what rail journey have you enjoyed the most, and for what reason? I know, it's like picking your favourite child, isn't it?
The first thing I'd say is every rail journey is enjoyable.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Probably one of the quirkiest that I really enjoyed was in Yangon in Myanmar, so Rangoon in Burma. They have the Circle Line, which runs around the city. I think as a tourist I paid at $1, which is probably 20 times what the locals paid. But it goes around the city but out into the countryside, and the train is used by farmers. So they get onto the train with all their crops, are then preparing the crops for sale in the city. When the train arrives in the city, all the crops are then prepared, ready for sale.
Oh, wow.
And it's just such a fabulous experience. It's probably a bit of a cliche, but lots of local colour, smells, atmosphere. It's the only time I've actually seen a rodent running around on a train. So there were field mice running around.
You've just put off a whole load of people, by the way.
No, they were quite cute. That was brilliant. Then in Europe, again, a bit of a cliche, but the Bernina Express, the train through the Alps from Switzerland to Italy. It runs from St. Moritz down to a town called Tirano. Any time of year to take that. Winter is obviously, you've got lots of snow, feet and feet of snow. Then in the summertime, there's still some snow high up, but fabulous views. Just on that one, the tip is not to take the Bernina Express, which is the tourist train.
Okay.
It's a working railway. People travel on that train to commute, to go to school, to go to work, on what one would call the local train. Mm-hmm. And with the local train, they have panorama windows which pull down, so you can get your head out the window, take fantastic pictures. And often the trains are very quiet. Whereas on the tourist train, you're enclosed in a carriage, which does have glass that goes round to make it an observation car, but the windows don't open. For your photos, for those iconic photos, you're always going to get a shadow or kind of light shining in the reflection.
Yeah.
And they tend to be frequented by quite a lot of tour groups.
Yeah.
So it's not a local experience.
Yeah.
But up
Great
on the
tip.
local train, fantastic. So that's really, really good. I love traveling by train in Russia. Often they're not particularly scenic journeys because it's quite a flat country, or a lot of it's flat where the railways are. But it's just the experience of you get on a train and it's going to be going for 3-4 days, and people are traveling on it for 3-4 days. It's just a completely different experience, a different mentality.
Yeah.
And the tip on there as well on Russian trains, even in the middle of winter, just take a vest and some shorts. You'll fit in with all the locals because the trains themselves are quite hot, even in winter.
Really?
And yeah, flip flops, and you'll be stopped in Siberia -25. I would then put all my coat on and wrap up. But the locals are just hopping off, having a cigarette in the shorts and kind of singlet. -25. It's like, okay, guys,
God.
yeah, fine.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's just so many great train experiences. Czech Republic again, riding around there. It's such a beautiful country. It's quite hilly. Yeah, it's just a very, very nice country to explore by train. And also they have such a dense network of railways. You really can get into every nook and cranny of the country by train.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I love that.
Just lots and lots.
What about train travel in Africa? Have you done much train travel in Africa, and what's that like?
I travelled from Dar es Salaam to Gaborone, so down through Zambia, Zimbabwe, into Botswana, Tanzania. That was on a private train run by a company called Rovos Rail.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the best train in the world in my experience.
Really?
Because it's a lot of heritage rolling stock, some of it from the 1930s, but it's been refurbished to a very high standard. They have ensuite bathrooms.
Wow.
But the Orient Express, for example, if you're going to Venice, doesn't have ensuite bathrooms. The food is fantastic. The wine cellar on the train is amazing. They had about 30 different pinotages, as I recall, and I was on it for more or less 2 weeks. So we got to sample with lunch and with dinner. And yeah, you're just experiencing Africa again at ground level, and the railways the infrastructure is not particularly great, so the train is going slowly. So you really get to see animals out the window just plodding along next to the train. Yeah, that for me is the best train in the world.
Sounds pretty special, actually. Another question for you. I'm just sort of thinking about some of these really long rail journeys that there must be everywhere around the world, and parts of Australia. You've got the sort of coast to coast there. What's been the most comfortable train to sleep on?
Okay, so ironically, I have real difficulty sleeping on trains.
Really?
Yeah. When I'm in a bed, in a seat, I can fall asleep like that. But when I'm in a bed, there must be some psychology there thinking, I must go to sleep. But the best night's sleep I've had was in October last year. I travelled from Helsinki to a town called Kolari, which is north of the Arctic Circle. The reason for going there, it was my last piece of railway line in Finland that I hadn't travelled on. So I have a little project, All the Lines Europe. I want to travel on every passenger line in Europe. I'm quite well advanced with that. But so I needed to do this bit in Finland. And it was a 14-hour journey from Helsinki, double deck rolling stock. So I was in a berth upstairs. It had an ensuite bathroom, but because it was upstairs, you didn't get the clickety clack of the wheels going. Smooth as anything, and yeah, the best night's sleep on a train. Usually, people say, on a long train journey, the best night's sleep is the second night, because they're so shattered because they haven't slept the first night. They just zonk out on the second night, which is true. But yeah, the Finnish train, just absolutely superb. Such a comfortable experience.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Before we go, I suppose if there was anything that you could say to anybody out there listening, and they're sort of, they're umming and ahhing and thinking about taking a rail journey as part of their holiday or vacation coming up, any last sort of bits of tips or advice or suggestions for our listeners out there that have maybe never done it before?
Okay, don't look at the traveling to your destination as just as a trip to get from A to B. Think of it as a journey, and as a journey you can then explore places en route. Do consider stopping off en route, so perhaps sacrificing some of the time in the destination, because you'll have new experiences as you're making your way to the destination. So Spain, for example, say going to the Costa Brava, you can have a night in Paris, have dinner, experience some of Paris. Or one of my tips was to take the train either to Bordeaux or Lyon and spend the night there. Lyon for the restaurants, there's just absolutely incredible. Then the following day from Lyon, there's a train through to Barcelona. So it's all quite easily achievable, no complex changing trains. And also one of the things is, say, going down to Spain by train or to the south of France, which I personally love. Sitting upstairs on a double-deck TGV, the thing I notice is the colour of the roofs on houses change as you get further south. So it goes from grey up in the north, starts going down to terracotta the further south you go, and you see the change as you're going along. It's just an everyday train journey for lots of people, but for me, it's just such a great experience to see that change. And also it allows you to see how diverse Europe is as well. Even from traveling on the trains, even if you're not a geek, you'll notice different operating practices in the different countries, and there are, there's quirks that you'll notice, which again, if you'd say just flying Manchester down to Barcelona, you won't experience any of that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I love that. Andy, that's sadly all we've got time for this week. I feel like I could quite happily speak to you for hours on end about all of your experiences and about trains. And as you talk about the different journeys that you've been on in the trains, it's absolutely infectious. Really looking forward to finding out what our listeners think about all this, and encourage all of our listeners out there to get in touch and let us know your thoughts on this. But Andy, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and for taking the time to speak with us. And I think we should do this again next year, so we could cover some areas of the world that we didn't touch today, and do a follow-up episode if you're okay with that.
Well, absolutely. Trains are a passion of mine. I could talk for hours and hours about them.
Super stuff. Andy, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks.
So there you have it. Thanks again to Andy for taking the time to share his experiences with us this week. And if you're anything like me, your appetite has now been whetted for more info on rail travel internationally. With the increased interest in so-called slow travel among our low-season traveller community, we're really excited about the possibility of more rail travel in the future. And as such, we've agreed with Andy to record a special 6-part mini-series featuring each of the continents which Andy has explored by rail, so that he can share his experiences of great rail journeys around the world with all of us. So watch this space, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcasts on iTunes, Spotify, or any other way you prefer, because you will not want to miss this series. Next week, we're off to discover one of the most beautiful regions in the whole of Africa, But until then, thanks as always for your company this week, and if you'd like to learn more about what the travel industry is doing to recover from the coronavirus, we're running a webinar series entitled Keeping the Dream Alive, alongside our partners at the World Tourism Association of Culture and Heritage, every Tuesday and Thursday throughout May. We'll be hearing from some of the world's leading authorities on tourism recovery, and you can find full registration details on the Low Season Traveller pages on Facebook and LinkedIn, and the Q&A session with each expert will be released as a podcast on this channel every week. Have a great week, stay healthy, stay safe, stay home, and don't forget to share this podcast with your friends, family and social networks. Our content will always be free for everyone, as we believe travel is better without the crowds.